This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated, almost without knowing it, when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
This Athletic podcast is sponsored by Shopify. Now, when you think about companies like Skims or Allbirds, they are selling through the roof. Sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but often the overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, which makes buying and selling simple. And for millions of businesses, that business is Shopify, because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret with ShopPay, it boosts conversions by up to 50%. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell while your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web or in your store, in their feed and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more on Shopify. So upgrade your business to get the same checkouts used by Skims and Allbirds. Sign up right now for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/theathletic, all in lowercase and with no spaces. Upgrade your selling today at shopify.com/theathletic. That's shopify.com/theathletic.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Max Verstappen turned his stunning pole position into Japanese Grand Prix victory, leading home Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. But how big a missed opportunity was this for McLaren, and could the race have been played better strategically? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to dissect goings-on at Suzuka are Mark Hughes and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Mark, we'll come to you first. How's Suzuka? I'm not out there. I've been doing this one from home, so I'm missing the on-the-ground vibe.
Yeah, Suzuka is magnificent as ever. And it delivered us this a masterclass of virtuosity, mainly apparent yesterday rather than on race day. And race day we just saw Max convert that virtuosity into a pretty much perfect race, wasn't it, for him?
Yeah, a very special one. I must admit, when you said a masterclass of virtuosity, I thought you might have been speaking about Scott Mitchell-Malm. Scott, has your weekend been a masterclass professionally?
I think it's been a solid display of just slightly above mediocrity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so.
you're being hard on yourself there.
I think somewhere between mediocrity and virtuosity is my sweet spot. So,
right, yeah.
So I'm happy with that. No, I've enjoyed being here, at whatever level I have performed at. On the point about the job being done mainly on Saturday rather than Sunday, it was interesting. A few drivers had come past in the mix zone after the race and used the word boring, and I know that Oscar Piastri sort of implied it in the cool-down room as well. So when Fernando Alonso came through, I said to him, a lot of your fellow drivers have said this race was quite boring. How was it for you? Boring, difficult, fun? And he said definitely not boring, but he did find it amusing because he said Suzuka's now like he compared it to Monaco actually. So it's a place, we're there on the Thursday and waxing lyrical about it, and then you're on Saturday and everything's absolutely amazing, and then we get to Sunday and he sort of implied like we all remember where we are, and he's like, oh, actually this isn't necessarily the best place for an exciting Grand Prix, but everybody still loves being here nonetheless. And as a weekend overall, it is fantastic.
There were more place changes at Monaco last year than in this race.
Oh God,
yeah.
Looking forward to your opening question then.
Well, we will talk about that later on in the members' questions section, although there is a certain inverse proportionality law when it comes to the quality of the Drivers' Challenge and the quality of the race and overtaking in terms of the action, shall we say, not necessarily the driving in the race. But anyway, Mark, let's go straight into the traditional question. How did the race play out?
Max disappeared from pole. Well, he didn't disappear. He converted pole into the lead, and he was closely followed by the two McLarens. And that's what happened. 53 laps later, that's where we were.
Yeah, pretty succinct explanation, but very much the way it's the way it's worked out. But obviously, Scott, it was all about Max Verstappen's pole position on the Saturday, wasn't it? That put him in position. And we'll get into the McLaren strategy and that kind of thing, and put a little bit more meat on the bone of how the race worked out. But how good was what Verstappen did at Suzuka, particularly yesterday?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to say about the Saturday exploits than the Sunday exploits. Not to say he wasn't great on Sunday, but he had to not put a foot wrong. And when does Max Verstappen put a foot wrong when he's leading from the front on Sunday? So he earned this. He earned the track position, the advantage that it conveys through just an astonishing performance on Saturday. And it wasn't, Red Bull worked really hard. And Christian Horner said they turned the car on its head, didn't they, after Friday practice? Pretty much everything that could be changed did seem to be changed in some way. Max's list of grievances with the car on Friday was quite long, but it's not like the Red Bull came out on the Saturday and was suddenly electric. Andreas Stella from McLaren was sort of suggesting that they thought Verstappen was more in the mix than other people felt after Saturday practice, that once you took into account engine modes and fuel loads, that maybe they had a tenth and a half or 2 tenths on Verstappen. But it looked like more than that through qualifying. Q1 a quarter of a second off, Q2 0.35 off, I think, and even a little bit off after the first runs in Q3.
He's a quarter of a second off after the first run in Q3.
Yeah, so not a deficit that you're thinking this is about to suddenly become overturned, and they still had such an advantage to the rest of the field. The McLarens didn't absolutely nail it, but it's not like they left tons of time on the table. But that max lap was just, I saw it the last half of it from the mix zone. We were watching it with Pierre Gasly. Gasly's one of the drivers who will always pause what he's doing in the mix zone with the media to see the end of Q3 when he's out in Q2. So he just like mid interview with us just stopped and turned, and we were watching it basically together. And I watched his commitment through the chicane I knew that it was close. I watched it through the chicane and was that it can't be faster than that. Like he cannot go through there quicker than he did right now. And then I finally watched the onboard of the whole lap a few hours later, and I do not see how an RB21 could do a lap around Suzuka faster. Like, it was every single bit just seemed to be like just teasing the absolute maximum out of it everywhere, and somehow taking it to the limit without ever overstepping it to the point where he couldn't correct it without losing time. I thought it was sensational. I do genuinely believe that's one of the great qualifying laps of this era of Formula One car.
Yeah, I agree. It was just absolute perfection. You did a nice piece, Ed, on how he was getting the thing rotated through the S's. It wasn't actually as good a car as the McLaren through the S's, and but he was keeping it in play. It was, Norris was ahead at that point in the lap, but he was keeping it in play, and then he was faster down the straights, faster at the end of the straight, so he was clawing some of it back there because he had lower wing level. But his speed into Spoon in particular and into the braking zone for the final chicane was just extraordinary. You sort of step back and thought, oh, that's not going to go in surely, and it just did. Because he has that beautifully fine-honed sensitivity to just get the thing turned without it then scrubbing, and it was just it was just a beautiful, perfect lap. The car's traits were quite different to the McLaren's. It's a much more aggressively loaded front end when you're braking, but that brings its own penalties sort of mid-corner, and that's what they've been struggling with, and that's what the big equation that we're trying to solve through Friday and Saturday was, because it is a fussier car to set up than the McLaren. But yeah, they did it. They decoded it to the point where it was just about quick enough that if either McLaren driver slipped up, a Max Verstappen was there to take advantage, and he just did so brilliantly.
Yeah, the thing I loved about that lap is it was all about what I call provocation and reaction. You provoke the car to do things and you react to it. And actually, aside from some of the areas you've mentioned, there's so much interesting about this lap. There's a great bit at the hairpin where he's really quick off it, where you watch it on board and you think, oh, is he a little bit late on the power? But he gets on the power, feeds it in so well. He just perfectly sensed when he could get away with applying the power. That can be a really messy corner for a lot of people, and Max was beautiful there. So he's not just sending it everywhere and just stabbing at the power, trying to get it on and chucking it into corners. He just knows he has that extraordinary sensitivity, as well as that commitment and that ability to hustle the car when he needs to get it rotated, etc.
And one other thing I would want to say about Verstappen, I think this weekend is underlined, but I think we'd already seen over the first two this year. I think he's absolutely revelling in the role of underdog this season.
Absolutely.
I do think last year when he ended up in that role on a weekend by weekend basis, but was obviously still in control from a championship perspective, and it was more about kind of control and how it was slipping away and that kind of thing. I don't think that always brings out the best in him. I think sometimes that can actually tip him in the other direction. But I think this year, because everything goes back to zero, clean slate, and he knows, he knew from testing, he knew from the first race, he's not going into that on a level playing field car-wise with the opposition. Well, I think that's just absolutely taken him to, not another level, but taking him to the very best of his abilities. You could be probably hypercritical and maybe pick out one or two things, but I don't see how he could have a point more this season. I don't see how he could have done better in Australia. You know, he split the McLarens early on there, and then obviously hounded Norris towards the end of that race. In China, he was third in the sprint, but that car did not look like it was on a par with Hamilton's Ferrari or Piastri's McLaren, and he actually gained points on Norris in that race. In the Grand Prix, I know he wasn't perfect. He made that small mistake, didn't he, into turn one, but by the end of the race he's back ahead of the Ferraris and not far off beating George Russell's Mercedes, and I think the Mercedes was a quick car that weekend, so it wasn't like the Red Bull was like overtly faster and has been like a clear second best at every track. And then come here, and I think as you were saying, Mark, in terms of where Red Bull got the car to, they got the car to a point where Max could basically just go, yeah, don't worry, I've got it from here. Yeah, exactly, I'll do the rest. And he's not just split the McLarens or come close, he's put it on pole, and then he's won the race because of what he's done on the Saturday. But again, absolutely faultless in the Grand Prix, just ticking every box. And I think you see it in the way that he talked about and celebrated his pole on Saturday and the win on Sunday. It wasn't quite like Brazil last year, where there was that enormous release of like emotion and pressure, but that was a win. That was a celebration of a win that like meant so much to Verstappen and Red Bull, because that was a win in defiance of a better car. Yeah. And I feel like Verstappen's absolutely thriving in this situation at the moment.
Yeah, he's been absolutely brilliant, but I think we can probably agree that McLaren haven't made the absolute most of everything this year, good as their start has been. And inevitably, we had loads of questions from the Race Members Club about the strategy. So let's quickly work through them. Mark, a load of names here: Matt Bailey, Andrew Marson, Kate Clark, Kevin King, Stephen Camp, Gordon Ross, Ben Hawkes, Jake Wilkins, Henri H, Andrew Wilson, all ask about McLaren's pit stop strategy, whether it should have been different or perhaps even braver, particularly in terms of maybe leaving Norris out a little bit longer before that pit stop. What do you think?
Superficially, it looks unadventurous, and it looks like they lost a possible opportunity of winning the race. By not bringing Norris in on the lap that they brought Piastri in instead to try for the undercut, and B, once that they hadn't done that, by not leaving Norris out and giving him a tyre offset for the second stint. But actually, when you look into it, neither of those things would have worked. They had to bring Piastri in when they did, because to do otherwise, he would have lost position to Russell, who'd stopped the previous lap. So you need around here as much as 1.4 seconds on the car in front to be able to overtake. There's no way he was ever going to have that on the Mercedes. So he was effectively going to bump himself out of the top three if they hadn't brought Piastri in when they did. Had they sacrificed Piastri and brought Norris in on that lap instead in order to undercut Max, it wouldn't have worked. He would have come out behind Behrman, which Piastri did actually, and it lost him 0.8 of a second. With the pace Norris was doing, that loss behind the Haas would have ensured he wouldn't have made the undercut. Had he stayed out for a few laps, the problem with that is the tyre deg was so low that he wouldn't have had much of an offset no matter how many laps he stayed out, especially on the hard tyre. And there was the added hazard, of course, that he may have he would have been undercut by Piastri. So McLaren would have undercut Piastri past Norris, which would have created difficulties in the team, I'm sure. And he may have even been vulnerable to being undercut by Leclerc. So it was never feasible. It looked superficially, it looked like it, but actually, when you look at the gaps to the traffic, it wouldn't have worked. So no, they didn't get the strategy wrong.
Scott, a question from Protonic Arrow, Nathan, James Rowland and Scott Kleinklaus. Should McLaren have let Oscar through to fight Max, and if so, would Piastri have won the race?
I thought so when that final stint was playing out. It did look like Norris was struggling to get within really 1.5 seconds of Verstappen, and Piastri closed into Norris more convincingly. There was also a message that about this is Lando's pace that implied that was as fast as Lando could go. I wonder if it actually meant this is the pace that Lando will run at, rather than like this is all he's got.
I think that's what it meant. And also, as was pointed out, Lando was running in Norris's dirty air, so of course Oscar could close up at will.
Yeah,
Stella, he was dropping back and then closing up at will, so it appears as though he's faster, but that's because the guy in front is constrained by the car in front of him.
Stella was saying that being in Verstappen's dirty air was problematic for Norris, so the implication was Norris was just hanging back at the distance that was sort of safest, without close enough but not so close that he's shredding his tyres. So I kind of revised my opinion. I wonder if actually it was less about that, and therefore if that's the situation, you can't then just order Piastri past. You could do it on the condition that he then obviously lets Lando back past if he can't get closer. But if Norris is just hanging in there waiting until the very end to then see if he can do something right at the end, you can't take that away from Norris, because it's all a big chess game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. The next question comes from Sean Murphy, who says, do you see any advantage of putting one of the McLarens on a two-stopper, starting on softs to send them away like a hare in the early stages to distract Max? Or was the two-stopper not really an option on this track today? No, it wouldn't have worked. Two-stopper wouldn't be an option. I think if you started a driver on softs, there's no guarantee they'd have got ahead of Verstappen. In fact, I think they wouldn't have done. Doohan and Stroll didn't make much progress on the softs at the start, short of completely and utterly sacrificing one car and starting it on sort of Derek Warwick Brands Hatch 1982 fuel levels to give him a massive offset. I don't think it would have worked. So yeah, it just wasn't an option. Right. There's another point we haven't talked about, Mark, which was the pit exit battle. And interestingly, There's a question I put together from Ed and Sigurd Deras, and interestingly, it's opposing takes of that Verstappen-Norris pit lane exit battle. Ed asks, given the distance from Max's car to the white line, was Verstappen playing games with Norris and was it dangerous? While Sigurd asks if race control let McLaren off the hook by not penalising Norris for an unsafe release.
I think it was just normal racing, wasn't it? There was a gap there that was probably going to be closed by the time Lando got there, but he showed his nose just in case, and I don't think he can have been surprised that he didn't get Max's cooperation, and so had to take evasive action. But he did so in the knowledge that there was that space there on the grass if needed. I can see why there was no action taken there by the stewards. I don't think there was anything wrong. Either of them, I think it was fair enough to try and fair enough to get blattered away. I think that's just racing.
Norris said, I think, afterwards that was just racing, but obviously that wasn't his attitude in the moment, where he did the usual modern F1 driver thing of getting over the radio and insisting that he was pushed off the track.
But that's for the benefits of the stewards to see if you can pull one over them, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a little bit of it's just the snitching that goes on, isn't it? Unfortunately, but I don't imagine Norris went into that thinking there was any likely outcome other than Max doing exactly what he did. If there was the slightest movement right for Max, it was really just making sure his car was in the exact position it needed to be. He was under no obligation to just move left and allow Norris to go past. If he'd done that, he would have crossed the white line, and he probably would have got a penalty himself.
Yeah, I didn't have any problem with it either. And in terms of the way they apply unsafe release, it was all right. It was just Norris then chose to contest it, which was his prerogative, and went on to the only bit of track or not track that he could do. Before we take a quick break, I just wanted to tell you about an audience survey that our friends at The Athletic are doing. Very simple. You fill out a quick survey about you and your podcast habits, and in return, you'll be entered into a draw with 3 lucky entrants winning £100 or $100 worth of Amazon vouchers. So whether you're a long-time listener or a new one, just head to theathletic.com/athletic/survey25. That's theathletic.com/athletic/survey25. And the link is also in our episode description.
Many think of beauty and health as disconnected, but beauty and wellness are really two sides of the same coin. Hello, I'm Isabella Rossellini, and in the final episode of This Is Not a Beauty podcast, we'll hear from a cancer survivor, an anthropologist, and a carer of the elderly about the relationship between beauty and health. Listen now on your favorite podcast platform.
We'll get back to the podcast in a moment, but first, let me tell you about Grammarly. Your time and expertise are valuable, and with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster with AI prompts, tone suggestions, and more. And what's more, you can enjoy it with peace of mind with Grammarly's enterprise-grade security and its business model that doesn't sell your data. Experience the gold standard of responsible AI with Grammarly, a tool that 93% of professionals report helps them get more work done. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
How can you grow your business from idea to industry leader? Bring your vision to life with smart business buying tools and technology from Amazon Business. From fast, free shipping to in-depth buying insights and automated purchase approvals, we deliver everything you need to achieve your goals. It's not easy to stand out from the crowd. Simplify how you stock up to get ahead. Go to amazonbusiness.com for support.
Right, Scott, let's talk Ferrari. Charles Leclerc had a disappointing weekend results-wise, as he's never going to be delighted with fourth place, but he can certainly be happy with his performance, given he overachieved by beating the Mercedes. There's perhaps more to say, though, about Lewis Hamilton. He made an interesting revelation after finishing 7th in the race, didn't he? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, revelation is probably a little bit of an oversimplification, Ed, just purely because Hamilton couldn't really have dropped his hints in a more convoluted way. I think he left the breadcrumbs, didn't he? But he left them in quite a scattered order, so it was quite difficult to make out where they were going. The basic way of summarising it is they're kind of like two things. There's the Ferrari element, which is that they haven't had the car in its sweet spot this weekend for either driver, which we, as best as we can make out, relates to the fact that it's having to run a slightly higher ride height here at Suzuka. Obviously, Hamilton was disqualified for the excessive plank wear in the last race in China, and it's been resurfaced here at Suzuka, but they just can't afford to. They don't have the margin that they need at the moment. Certainly not here. But then the more curious part was Hamilton's roundabout way of eventually getting to the implication that there's something not quite the same across both cars, and it brought back memories of some of the comments last year, didn't it, about like differences on his side in the Mercedes or on his car getting slower in qualifying. This seems to be more related specifically to setup, though. I think that's right, isn't it, Mark? Rather than like a spec discrepancy or something like that.
Yeah, the Ferrari's running in compromised form at the moment. It's running a higher ride height than it was intended to. And so that's the general problem. Obviously, they're on both cars, but Lewis had gone different again to Charles on his setup, and it didn't work. So yeah, he had the double hit, and he expressed it in with such ambiguity that you could read sort of into it anything you wished. But I think the reality is that it's just a car that's not working as it's currently configured, and Lewis is making choices to try and get around that, but based on insufficient information, as he's still unfamiliar with the car and its systems and his working environment.
Right, Mark. For the first time this season, George Russell didn't quite get the best possible result. He was fifth behind Leclerc thanks to that final Q3 run going awry. But Kimi Antonelli had his strongest weekend performance-wise in sixth. What did you make of his showing?
Yeah, it was good. He picked up performance through the weekend. He was struggling when he first arrived. And he just generally made progress. Each time he went out, he was a little bit quicker and a little bit quicker. And in the race, he was bang on the pace. And because he didn't have any undercut pressure from behind, because the car behind him was Lewis, who was started on hards and so was always going to be running along, he was able to run along. That wasn't the plan going in, but he was able to run along. And then he came out on tyres 12 laps newer than George's, and so was able to close George down. I know earlier on we said there was very little tyre deg. There was some, but also George was constrained to the pace of Leclerc, because as we discussed earlier, you cannot pass around here. So George was effectively driving at the pace of a Ferrari running to higher ride height, and that enabled Kimi on his newer tyres to catch right up to the tail of George by the end, and set the race as fastest lap, led it for a time, all just experience that I'm sure will help him with his confidence as we go forward.
Record-setting experience as well. Youngest ever fastest lap, youngest ever race leader. Yeah. But beyond, I think what mattered more for Antonelli this weekend than they're very nice records to hold, I'm sure, but I actually was more impressed by the substance of the turnaround for qualifying. Yeah. I was trackside in all three practice sessions, and in the same place outside of turn 4, watching through the high-speed S's in the first sector, and the difference between Antonelli and Russell through there was one of, if not the most stark between teammates. It was so obvious that Antonelli was just that little bit more constrained through there, and he admitted after qualifying, when he had kind of really turned it around at the last minute, made a really, really good step for qualifying, that he'd been lost through practice from FP1 onwards. He was really struggling, hadn't made a step, or hadn't felt he'd made a step. He had to dig quite deep into his driving. As I understand it, he got a lot of help from Valtteri Bottas, obviously Mercedes reserve driver, who's here assisting with lines and approach and what he could do better. And eventually, because Antonelli is obviously a a fantastic driver, extremely gifted young man, but he's also very diligent, and he's a hard worker, and he understands, like, he's got quite an intellectual approach, I think, to what he can do better, and he was able to just about sort of untangle the mess that he got into by the end of FP3, and then was like, right, okay, if I'm gonna need to do a lot, but it's kind of all there if I do it. And actually, to be fair to him, he obviously didn't get onto Russell's level, but he went from basically being a serious risk of not even being in Q3 to being bang right there on the same row as George for the Grand Prix, and that it saved his weekend because it was going nowhere fast.
Let's talk about Isack Hadjar now, Scott. He finished 8th, won the midfield. You've been a bit of a Hadjar sceptic, a bit more so than I've been, certainly. So what did this prove?
Well, proves that you were right then, doesn't it? And Scott was wrong.
Always.
I've been impressed by Hadjar from a pace point of view. I think the raw material has always been impressive. I've always felt though that he's on a very steep learning curve and that's not a reflection of sort of his ability or capacity necessarily. It's the reality of the fact that he'd had one dry test day in an F1 car really before his F1 season, and obviously the FP1 outings that he'd done. And there were doubts even within Red Bull about sort of just being able to sort of control things and everything like that. The pace has been apparent since Melbourne. You know, from the first Friday of the season, he's switched on really well. He obviously had that formation lap crash in Melbourne, but he was super fast in China too. Like Yuki Tsunoda, it was the team strategy that cost him there, rather than sort of anything overt on Hadjar's part. And then here this weekend, he's been fantastic. From the first lap, I was so impressed watching trackside. Impressed by the car as well, the confidence that it gave both drivers, because even Liam Lawson readjusting to that team and driving that car for the first time looked good. But Hadjar definitely stood out. It was a step above Lawson, and I would say one of the most head-turning drivers that came past, and actually for me on Friday was the standout, because like the McLaren came through, for example, and I was super impressed by the direction change of the McLaren at high speed, but that didn't stun me because it's the fastest car. It's leading both championships. Of course, it's good. Hadjar was just like first time here, obviously from an F1 perspective, and just throwing it into those high speed bits like he'd been testing here all week, and then the fact that translated into pace around the whole lap and then continued through the whole weekend, nailed it in qualifying. The bit that impressed me most, I would say, in qualifying is actually I was worried in Q1 it was getting away from him, and I thought he was kind of letting it get the better of him as he was dealing with that belt issue. It compromised his runs, it left him really under pressure. And there was that point where he was apologising to the team for like it potentially ruining qualifying before he's even going out for the final run. And I was like, no, that's too defeatist. You can't be like that. And so I was worried that was it was all getting a little bit too much. But he managed to he removed that fog from his head just in time for that final run. Nailed it. Got through. Nailed Q2. Obviously didn't have the belt issue then after he got out the car in between. Did an absolutely fantastic job. There's nothing more he could have done. This was an outstanding weekend on track.
I think we can excuse him from being distracted by that belt issue, given the nature of it, though. Given where he was being squeezed,
the distraction and as he put it, like how hard it was to focus. That bit was absolutely fine, completely understandable. It was purely that little bit of like, this is the problem you've got now. We've kind of just got to deal with it, rather than keep telling the team how sorry you are. Like I completely understand where it came from, and to his total credit, he gathered it all together. He drove through the pain and the discomfort, and he did a very, very good job.
Right, Mark, we had Alex Albon the points again in 9th, good solid Q3 appearance as well, error-free race drive. But Ollie Behrman in 10th, that was a surprise. How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, he got the thing into Q3 as well. That was just like up at the front. The good work was done on Saturday, and as long as you sort of held your position off the grid and didn't make any mistakes, that's where you're going to finish. And that's there's no overtaking, there was no tyre deg, so. Yeah, he did the good work on Saturday, and it was terrific. I mean, really, really impressed. Very, very quick through the the high-speed section. The car's good. With the on-the-hoof modified floor that they did to get rid of the issue that they had in Melbourne, it returned to its natural self of being a quick car through the high-speed corners. And he absolutely exploited that. And you wouldn't know it was the same guy that just 2 races earlier had that horrible scrappy weekend in Melbourne. He just looked immaculate.
It was so good that he consigned Esteban Ocon to one of Esteban's weekends where he's just a little bit off it, and then he's sort of looking for excuses within the car and issues like that. But I put several questions to Ayao Komatsu on Sunday after the race in an attempt to make sure to scrutinise Esteban's claims that like something wasn't quite working on his car in the way that it seemed to be helping Ollie. And Komatsu said that there was no discrepancy between the flaws on the cars. There was nothing in the data to suggest it. They didn't know why Esteban was struggling so much. And he also slapped down my slightly generous suggestion that maybe it could have been because Behrman had the floor on for all of Friday, whereas Ocon only got it for Saturday, and maybe he didn't quite have time to adapt to it because the change was not that big.
Excellent stuff from Ayao Komatsu. He's always very, very direct in his answers. Now, Scott, let's talk about the 2 drivers who are very much in the spotlight this weekend. Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson ended up 12th and 17th, respectively, in the race. But let's start with Tsunoda. Do you think his weekend was a failure?
Well, it was in the sense that he went into it, obviously, with the ultimate dream of standing on the podium, and the expectation was to score points, and also it's a failure by the standards that he set himself through Friday and most of Saturday, because he was actually really quick. He did such a good job adjusting to the Red Bull. Didn't have any real sign of the limitation and confusion that hurt Lawson so much in his 2 weekends in the team. There were some mitigating circumstances for why at times he was quite so close to Verstappen over one lap in terms of run plans and timings and whatnot. But I think if they'd both nailed absolutely everything in Q2, for example, I think Yuki would have been 3 or 4 tenths off Verstappen Max. Yeah. I think that's where he was. I think he was within 3 or 4 tenths of Max here when he nailed it. It's just it all unravelled in Q2. He didn't get it right, and that. He just paid the price for that on Sunday.
Yeah, Verstappen Max.
When I said that, I thought...
Is that what we're doing now?
Yeah.
So we'll talk about Tsunoda, Yuki.
Yeah, exactly. When I said that, I thought, I know how that sounds.
Yeah, I followed Tsunoda in quite a lot of detail from the onboards, and I was actually quite impressed with him. I think this is a good, solid foundation. There's only that nagging thing in the back of my mind if you think of the promising signs that we saw from some of the other Red Bull drivers at times. You thought, if it just builds on that and connects it all together, it's going to be great. But I do think... He wasn't fully confident in the car, but he looked relatively confident. He was willing to lean on it. He made good progress. And if that Q2 second run, which was his only fresh tyre run in Q2, had not gone badly, he'd have been up there, certainly in the top 6 in qualifying, I think. He'd have got a solid result, and I think the whole narrative would be sort of completely changed. So I think that's good from Tsunoda. And I guess you could probably say the same mark for Lawson, who, disappointing on paper, but... he wasn't that far off getting into Q3. If Degner 2 had gone better, he'd have been there. And then the race was just doomed because of track position and the strategy gamble they took.
Yeah, exactly. It's just on little fine details. First time in the car, not quite as quick as Hadjar, but within a sniff of him, his basic underlying pace. But yeah, it just sort of got away from him a little bit, and it sort of snowballed a bit. But there's nothing fundamentally wrong with his performance this weekend. It was a very different level of performance to that we'd seen from him in the Red Bull in the first 2 races.
Yeah, it's going to be a great thing to plot in Bahrain and Saudi, how those two, Tsunoda in particular, get on. But I think Tsunoda can be quietly positive despite the disappointing on-paper results.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by the Nissan Armada Pro 4X. With a twin-turbo V6 engine ready to propel your adventures, up to 8,500 pounds of towing capacity to haul all your favorite toys and space for 8 passengers. Nissan's most powerful car yet will chew up and spit out anything you throw at it. Learn more about the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada at nissanusa.com. Towing capacity varies by configuration. See Nissan Towing Guide and Owner's Manual for additional information. Always secure cargo.
As tradition demands, we'll finish the episode with a batch of questions from the Race Members Club. If you're interested in the Race Members Club, click the link in the episode description or search for the race on Patreon to find out more. As always, huge number of great questions to get through, and we'll aim to tackle a few more of them in the brief gap before Bahrain. Now, Mark, there were loads of questions about the race being dull. That included Paul Baker saying, why did I get up at 6 a.m. for this? Elliot Davison saying, what caused the massive lack of overtaking today? Also saying, how could a track this good produce a race this bad? Zoe Tan, does Suzuka need rain to be interesting? Jamin Halifax, when did Japan become the Monaco Grand Prix? So I guess the overall question from that is, why was it this way?
Yeah, well...
Mark, why did it suck?
There's a real conflict between a race which is absolutely flat out, where the drivers are able to lean on the cars and lean on the tyres and just have a proper old-fashioned flat-out race. But at a circuit at which you need such a big pace advantage, to be able to overtake. And so you're then relying for any action on tyre deg. And usually at Suzuka you have that, and traditionally it's been a 2-stop race, and so you get the variation around the different levels of tyre deg between different cars and the different strategies that creates. However, the resurfaced Sector 1, very, very grippy, lots of bitumen in the gaps between the open stones, in contrast to the second and third sector. That drastically reduced the tyre deg to such an extent that it was not only an easy one-stop, which I think everybody pretty much figured out in practice, but it was a flat-out one-stop. And so it's a flat-out one-stop, so there's no tyre deg offset between the cars. And there's no overtaking opportunity. So as long as there's then no incident, as everybody races down to the first corner, and there wasn't, then you're going to get the order that you started with pretty much, and it's just going to be a high-speed demonstration, which sometimes happens.
The flat-out nature of it caught me out at first, because I was looking at the pace through the field and thinking, some of the laps I'm seeing outside the top 10 make me wonder if Max is just like in management mode out front.
Yeah, I think for the first 10, 12 laps, both Max and the two McLarens were just exploring to see, when's the tyre deg going to kick in? Let's not push too hard on the heavy fuel. And they weren't very far clear of Leclerc for after 12 laps. But then they were let loose. I think you heard GP say to Max, tyre deg's not an issue. You can up the pace now. And the McLarens went with them, and now all of a sudden you then saw the gaps beginning to spread. But that's basically what it was. In hindsight, they could have gone harder at the start as well.
I was thinking of this when obviously I heard it from Alonso in the pen. In fact, actually, Fernando could have been one of the people that submitted one of those questions, as one of the questions obviously referenced the Suzuka and Monaco comparison. And I was thinking about this because there are a few circuits, Rob, because I feel like there was a shift at some point, I don't know, some point in the last 20 years, where we went from having tracks with slow corners leading onto long straights to then suddenly an advent of circuits with sort of medium and high speed corners leading onto long straights, because actually that's what we need for them to be able to follow. And here you've obviously got two of the three. You've not only got the straights having slow corners, 2 of the 3 straights having long slow corners onto them, so the hairpin and then obviously the final chicane, but 2 of the 3 long straights, different ones, have impossible to overtake corners at the end of them. You know, the start-finish straight, you can't send it into turn 1 because you're not actually braking properly into turn 1 in the same way. And then when you do the run from the hairpin all the way down to Spoon, you can't send it down the inside of Spoon in that way. The only overtaking spot is the chicane. So it's just inherently limited. And I don't think we are far off people. The thing is, like, Monaco and Suzuka are classics in different ways, aren't they? So you'll never, because the Suzuka Circuit Challenge and everything about it being a classic venue, I don't think you'll get the call for sort of circuit modifications in the way that you would Monaco every year, pretty much.
There's a question now from Ross Stevenson. Scott, race in 2025 have featured very few exciting overtakes. Many cars seem to struggle in the dirty air of others more than in recent seasons. Would you agree there's a problem, or have we just been unlucky with a couple of dull races early on?
The dirty air's worse this year.
Definitely.
I always thought it was naive when Nicholas Tombassis from the FIA said a year or 2 ago that, you remember they had the option of within the rules they can ban things basically that they don't like, that they think are undermining the objectives of the regulations to help the cars follow more closely, and they decided not to do more with that kind of freedom that they have within the rules because they felt that there wouldn't be a further degradation in the ability to follow over the remainder of the rule set, because they could have made changes for 24 and then for 25 if they wanted to. And they decided to save it and roll what they'd learned into the 2026 rules. Well, I think what we're seeing this year is evidence of that being a misjudgment, and the work that the teams are doing and the margins that the teams are playing with now, because it's a relatively constrained rule set, and I think people have bumped up against the ceiling fairly quickly. So you're just trying to find these tiny things to get more out of your car, especially when you're trying to find as many aero tricks as possible to try and get the balance of the car. It feels like overall load isn't the problem for any team now. It's actually balancing that out, and then that seems to be triggering more dirty air than before, because year on year, obviously, like, the cars are getting a little bit quicker, but it's not like tons and tons of like totally different wings or designs are suddenly appearing. It's just these marginal things that are making it worse. And also, because everything's getting closer, the teams are all getting closer, the cars are getting closer together, the gaps between the cars are smaller. So you're nowhere near, like here, the delta that you need to actually be able to overtake.
Question from Jarvis Brembo Dinger that I'll answer. Would bypassing the final chicane aid in overtaking? I'm struggling to think of ways to modify the circuit without diminishing its awesome character. It would obviously require some serious work to make a corner that could be taken flat. Well, Scott's touched on some of the arguments about that. I don't think it would fundamentally improve overtaking. It would make the circuit more awesome, and in fact it would put the circuit back to where it was. But the problem was, with the way the runoff would have to be, it was so hideously dangerous they had to change it. So fun, but yeah, that's going to be a no-go, unfortunately. Right, Mark, a question from Marios Gantzoudis. Christian Horner said that Red Bull turned Max's car upside down to find the right setup, and it paid off. Has Red Bull finally cracked the RB21 riddle to find the optimum setup more often, or was this a one-off?
No, I think it's always going to be a difficult car to set up. It's all of these cars are quite tricky in terms of where you balance the aero between how it behaves in the entry to the corner and mid corner, and that's what they really struggle with on this car. And it's there to be found usually. It does have a sweet spot, but it is a very narrow one. It's narrower than that of the McLaren, for example. So I think that's just the nature of the car. You've seen it on Red Bulls for the last year and a half, 2 years even. That even when they were dominating races, that quite often on a Friday they'd be quite a long way out on where they expected to be. I think that's just the nature of the beast.
Right, Scott, Michael Passingham, TJ Preston and Mike Fletcher all had questions about Alex Albon and his comms with the team, which were variously described as spicy, very ranty and really aggressive, pointing out it seemed out of character. So to explain what that's all about, is it about being more persuasive and underlying frustration, or just misleading broadcast choices?
Yeah, when that radio message was broadcast, I'll be honest, I actually laughed, because Albon can have an air of hysteria around his most impassioned radio messages sometimes, especially when he thinks that the team has done something kind of inexplicable to him in the car. On this occasion, I think it actually fell into the category of normal-ish driver reaction to something they disagree with because they don't have the whole information inside the car, and the team sort of obviously going along with it up until the point where they think it's time that the driver needs to shut up. And yeah, Albon in that situation is a little bit more kind of colourful in the language that he used than you might hear other drivers, but you hear it flare up sometimes. So no, I don't think it's misleading on the broadcast side, because there are times when radio messages are taken out of context, times not. This one was Albon was banged to rights in terms of what he said and how he said it, and he didn't really hide from that afterwards. He just didn't think it was as big a deal as obviously it probably came across.
Question from Jeremy Husted that I'll take. Why does Driver of the Day even exist? It is simply a popularity vote, and it's comical that Tsunoda would receive it over Verstappen today, amongst other previous oversights. Ed, can Driver of the Day be your new F1 annoyance? Well, it exists. They brought it in 2016. It exists to kind of appease the great God engagement, doesn't it? So it allows fans to vote, which they like. They can stick a sponsor name on it. Who is it? Salesforce or something like that. It's always on the logos. And yeah, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, I don't find it annoying because it's just a thing that's there, that's peripheral. If there was a point for it, I'd naturally be furious. But no, it's not a measure of who the driver of the day is. And yeah, it often is a popularity vote. So yeah, I don't take it particularly seriously, but it's not a particularly meaningful thing for me. But if people enjoy it and want to vote for it, I've got no problem with that. That's
when they thought about expanding the points so that you like doing a new points system so that more teams could get points, and then there would be like a lot more points for. One suggestion was that there'd be like a lot more points for the top 12 or 15 or something like that, raising the ceiling and the basement for the total number of points. Giving a point for driver of the day was actually suggested.
Yeah, well, if that had happened, I'd have rioted. That's just what would have happened. So, yeah.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to rise to it. I was hoping you were going to rise to that suggestion a little bit more. That was not an actual official F1 proposal. I was just trying to see if I could get you on your soapbox, Ed.
Well, to be honest,
not quite. Not quite. You hinted at it, but
the soapbox is always to hand. But stranger things have been suggested. But anyway, Mark, a question from Ben Gary: was Isack Hadjar's solid qualifying and eventual 8th place finish finally the proof that Racing Bulls has the fastest car in the midfield, or did Suzuka flatter them?
No, it's genuinely probably the fastest of the cars outside of the top 4 teams, I think. But the quality that it has, probably over every other car, is just how drivable it is. It's much less snappy and knife edgy than probably any other car. It doesn't have as much downforce as any of the cars from the top 4 teams, and through the fast corners you can see it's not going as fast, but you can manipulate it, and the driver can become creative and confident in it, and I think that's buying at lap time in itself. So yeah, it's a very nice. In terms of that midfield, I'd say it's probably the best car. The Williams is probably arguably faster on ultimate pace, maybe even the Haas. But in terms of just all round, as a package and something that allows the driver to push and which can get into its sweet spot relatively quickly, I'd say it's probably the best at the moment of that midfield bunch.
Scott, a question from Christopher Partridge. Considering Jack Doohan's crash in FP2, was it a mistake by Alpine to replace him as a rookie with a junior driver in FP1 so early in the season?
Yeah, so I had this thought as well, even going into the weekend before Doohan had the crash. I thought it was a bit strange. It was explained to me that Alpine had some car changes that they felt they needed Pierre Gasly in the car to evaluate, and obviously Rio Hirakawa was driving in FP1, so that meant Doohan having to vacate. And then when Doohan crashed at the start of FP2, I didn't know the exact details of it when I saw it from trackside, but I did think when that happened, I was like, well, I was genuinely very annoyed when it first happened. I was like, this is what happens. Like, I understand that he shouldn't crash, make a mistake, whatever, but he shouldn't be having his exploratory laps in an F1 car in FP2. Then the DRS thing happened, and my sort of like irritation with that kind of like rose and fell based on sort of what I learned about the nature of the mistake and what Doohan knew and expected and so on. Where I've kind of landed with it is, while it still would have been my preference for them to put Doohan in the car like that in FP1, what Alpine actually wanted to do, I think, did necessitate having Gasly in the car, because they were in a really good place in Bahrain after the test. They were a bit worse than that in Melbourne, and then by their own admission, they were a lot worse than that in China. And they did quite a lot of work after China to kind of dig into that and understand it. And what they kind of reached as a conclusion there is that there was quite a lot with the car platform conceptually, in terms of the tools that they have at their disposal, where the ride height can be, the mechanical settings on the suspension, etc., could be quite different. So they had quite a different setup philosophy, I think, that they wanted to run on the car this weekend, and they needed Gasly as the experienced driver to validate that in FP1. I think, bluntly, they didn't trust Doohan as an experienced rookie to be able to offer the feedback they'd have needed from FP1 to then press ahead with those changes, and they trusted Doohan to then be okay with that in FP2. I think these things are all interconnected and didn't help, but I do think that not driving in FP1, I think all of the stuff around the sim, which you can read on the website, and the fact that Doohan was just sort of pushing and making a mistake and doing it wrong basically in FP2, they're interconnected, but it's not like one doesn't equal the other basically.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because Doohan's made a quick start, but there have been too many incidents, mainly in races, but that really set him back for the weekend, so not ideal. And the final question I'll take from Pat Prix: does your heart ever sink a bit when you realise you have to make a whole podcast out of a snooze fest like that? Well, actually, I would say, in a way, it's better because there's less incident and frantic stuff to squeeze in and cover, that actually you can talk in a little bit more detail about a few of the things that otherwise would get pushed to the side. But it's nice to have the really big controversial topics to talk about. But actually, and this is always used to be the case, back when I was working at Autosport doing race reports from series, sometimes the best race reports, the most interesting ones, will be the ones where not much happened, because you can shine a light on all those little bits of detail. That's what we try to do on this podcast.
Is that the case of your race analysis on the website tonight, Mark? Is this one of those ones where it's a sparkling race analysis because the race was boring?
I would hope so, yeah. Give it a look.
What an ad. And while we're doing ads, before we sign off, we've got yet another giveaway to tell you about, because we're giving away a free month of access to the Race Members Club to the first 50 people who claim it via the link you can find in the description for this episode. So act fast to make sure you don't miss out, and we look forward to seeing you in our community very soon. Well, thanks very much, Scott and Mark. This was just the first part of a triple header, so we're heading towards the Middle East now, so stay with us for everything you need to know about the Bahrain Grand Prix.
The Athletic.